Today, for voices that once shaped the rhythm of American life have fallen silent. Each belonged to a different world: journalism, cinema, storytelling, and music, yet together they formed a quiet architecture of culture. Their work explained complex truths, revealed uncomfortable humanity, framed shared memories, and gave emotion a sound. None sought spectacle in their passing, yet their absence is deeply felt. What remains are words that clarified a nation's questions, performances that linger in the mind, stories that guided generations, and songs that carried feeling across time. This moment is not marked by noise or urgency, but by reflection. A pause to acknowledge lives lived with purpose, influence earned through discipline and craft, and legacies that continue even as the voices behind them fade. The news arrived quietly, carried in short lines and measured words, confirming that Robert Jacob Samuelson had died. It was December 2025 when the confirmation spread, steady and restrained, much like the man himself. There were no dramatic headlines, no sudden public scenes, just a simple truth settling in. A voice that had explained the economy to generations of Americans was now silent. Robert Jacob Samuelson spent his life making complexity understandable. For decades, his writing served as a bridge between experts and everyday readers. At a time when economic language often felt distant and technical, his work insisted on clarity. He believed people deserved to understand the forces shaping their lives. He was born on December 23, 1945, into a world rebuilding itself after war. That early context mattered. Growth, responsibility, and long-term thinking would later become central themes in his work. Economics, to him, was not abstract theory. It was about choices, consequences, and shared responsibility. Samuelson became widely known through his long career at the Washington Post. From 1977 until 2020, his columns appeared with steady regularity. Week after week, readers turned to his work not for comfort, but for explanation. He wrote about inflation, government spending, debt, and growth with calm discipline. His sentences were rarely dramatic. They were deliberate. Each idea was built carefully, grounded in evidence and history. He avoided slogans. He avoided outrage. Instead, he trusted readers to think. Alongside his work at the newspaper, Samuelson also served as a columnist for Newsweek from 1984 to 2011. There, too, his voice remained consistent. He questioned assumptions held by both political parties. He challenged easy narratives, and he warned, often early, about long-term risks others preferred to ignore. Colleagues described him as disciplined and precise. One former editor later reflected, "Bob never wrote to impress. He wrote to explain, and that made his work last." It was a simple observation, but one that captured his approach. Samuelson identified as a conservative, but he resisted labels that reduced debate to sides. His conservatism was rooted in caution and accountability. He believed economic promises should be measured against reality, not hope alone. That position sometimes made him unpopular, but it also earned respect across ideological lines. In the 1980s and 1990s, as markets expanded and government policies shifted, Samuelson's work gained wider attention. He warned about rising deficits when optimism was high. He questioned deregulation when confidence ran ahead of safeguards. He argued that prosperity, while real, was fragile. His critics sometimes called him pessimistic. He rejected that label. In one interview, he said, "I'm not against growth. I'm against pretending growth has no cost." It was a quiet line, but it stayed with readers over time. His columns became a record of American economic debate. They tracked recessions and recoveries. They reflected changing attitudes toward government and markets, and they consistently returned to one idea: that economic choices shape society in lasting ways. Samuelson believed journalism carried responsibility. He did not see his role as telling readers what to think, but as giving them the tools to decide. That belief shaped his tone. His writing avoided personal attacks. It avoided emotional manipulation. Instead, it relied on reasoning. Younger journalists often sought his advice. One former colleague recalled, "He told me to slow down, to read the data twice, to respect the reader." That advice, simple as it sounds, became part of his legacy. Outside the public eye, Samuelson lived a private life. He was known to value routine. He read widely. He followed history closely. Friends described him as thoughtful, reserved, and deeply committed to his craft. As digital media accelerated and attention spans shortened, Samuelson did not change his style. He did not simplify ideas into slogans. He trusted that clarity still mattered, even as the media landscape shifted. His columns remained steady. In 2020, he stepped away from regular writing. There was no farewell tour, no grand announcement, just a quiet conclusion to a long career. Readers noticed his absence gradually, as one notices a missing presence of a familiar voice. When news of his death emerged in December 2025, tributes followed in a similar tone. Economists, journalists, and former readers shared brief reflections. One message circulated widely online, reading, "He helped me understand the world without talking down to me." That mattered. It was not a dramatic tribute, but it was honest. Another former colleague wrote, "Bob believed facts deserved patience. He gave them that patience every week." Such remarks reflected how he was remembered, not as a personality, but as a presence. Samuelson's death marked the end of a particular style of journalism, one grounded in restraint, one that valued explanation over reaction. In a time when economic debate often turns loud and polarized, his absence feels noticeable. His legacy is not found in viral moments or sharp soundbites. It lives in archives of columns that still read clearly decades later. It lives in readers who learn to question easy answers. It lives in journalists who learn that seriousness and accessibility can coexist. Robert Jacob Samuelson spent his life speaking plainly about difficult things. He believed Americans were capable of understanding complexity, if given honesty and care. In that belief, he showed quiet respect for his audience. As his work settles into history, what remains is not just analysis, but an example of discipline, of patience, of civic responsibility. His voice may be gone, but the clarity he insisted on continues to shape how economic stories are told. In remembering Robert Jacob Samuelson, the nation remembers a man who trusted reason, respected readers, and served public understanding with steady purpose. His legacy endures in the calm space he carved for truth. The confirmation came without spectacle, quietly marking the end of a life lived on the edges of American cinema. In December 2025, news spread that Peter Greene had died. The reports were brief. The reaction was subdued. But for those who remembered his work, the weight of the loss settled slowly. He was not a celebrity built on charm or comfort. He was an actor who chose discomfort and made it feel real. Peter Greene became known in the 1990s, a time when American films were turning darker and more honest. His face, his voice, and his presence carried tension. He often played men who frightened others, or frightened themselves. He did not soften those roles, he leaned into them. Born in New Jersey, Greene did not follow a traditional path to fame. Acting was not about glamour for him, it was about truth. Friends from his early years recalled that he was drawn to people on the margins, their anger, their pain, their confusion. These were the emotions he understood. His breakthrough came through roles that were impossible to ignore. In The Mask, his performance carried menace beneath the surface. In Pulp Fiction, his character was brief but unforgettable. He did not need long screen time. His impact came from intensity. Directors noticed that quality. Greene had a way of standing still and making a scene feel unsafe. He did not overact. He did not explain his characters. He allowed silence to do the work. That restraint made audiences uneasy. And that was the point. One film critic later wrote, "Peter Greene didn't play villains. He played damaged people, and that honesty stayed with you." It was a quiet assessment, but an accurate one despite his growing recognition. Greene's career was not easy. He struggled privately, facing personal battles that were never hidden behind public statements. Those close to him said he carried his experiences into his work. Acting was not escape, it was expression. During the height of his career, Greene appeared in several crime dramas and independent films. He became a familiar face in stories about violence, addiction, and moral collapse. Yet behind the characters, he was known as thoughtful and reserved. A former co-star once said, "Peter listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it mattered." That quality carried into his performances. His characters felt lived in, not constructed. As Hollywood shifted towards spectacle and franchise storytelling, roles like Greene's became less common. His appearances slowed. He stepped back from the spotlight, not with an announcement, but with distance. He remained respected, even as his name appeared less often. Fans of 1990s cinema continued to revisit his work. Online discussions often returned to the same point. His performances aged well. They did not feel exaggerated. They felt real, even uncomfortable. When news of his death became public, tributes reflected that tone. There were no dramatic headlines, just shared memories. One social media post read, "He scared me on screen, but he made me believe every second. That's rare." Another wrote, "Peter Greene brought honesty to roles most actors avoided." For many, Greene represented a kind of acting that no longer dominates mainstream cinema. Acting that does not seek approval, acting that does not soften pain, acting that trusts the audience to sit with discomfort. His death in December 2025 closed A chapter on that era, a time when American films explored darker corners of human behavior, and actors like Greene were essential to that honesty. Those who worked with him described him as serious about his craft. He arrived prepared, he asked questions, he respected. The work, fame, they said, was never his goal. In interviews from earlier years, Greene spoke rarely about success. When asked about his roles, he once said, "I just try to tell the truth in the moment." That line would later feel like a summary of his career. Peter Greene's legacy is not measured in awards or box office numbers, it lives in scenes that still unsettle viewers decades later, in characters who feel uncomfortably close to real people, in performances that refuse to explain themselves. His work reminded audiences that cinema can be a mirror, not a distraction, that stories can confront pain without celebrating it, that darkness, when handled honestly, can reveal something human. As the film world continues to change, his absence is felt quietly. There will be no replacement for his particular presence. No easy comparison. Peter Greene will be remembered as an actor who chose truth over comfort, realism over polish, and honesty over ease. His work remains, and through it, the intensity he brought to American cinema continues to speak, even in silence. The news arrived softly, confirming that a guiding voice in American storytelling had gone quiet. In December 2025, it was confirmed that Robert Reiner had passed away. The announcement did not come with spectacle or urgency. It came with reflection. For many, it felt like the closing of a long chapter that had shaped how America saw itself on screen. Robert Reiner first became known as a familiar face in living rooms across the country. In the early years of television, he brought warmth and humor to stories that felt close to everyday life. His work on All in the Family placed him inside one of the most important cultural conversations of its time. That show did more than entertain. It confronted social tension, generational change, and moral disagreement. Reiner's presence helped ground those stories. He understood timing, he understood restraint. Most of all, he understood people. As his career evolved, Reiner stepped behind the camera. It was there that his influence deepened as a director. He focused on stories with heart and meaning. His films often explored truth, friendship, justice, and responsibility. They did not shout. They spoke clearly. Throughout the decades, Reiner's work reflected the mood of the nation. In times of optimism, his stories carried hope. In times of doubt, they carried honesty. He trusted audiences to think and feel at the same time. Colleagues often described him as thoughtful and steady. One longtime collaborator later said, "Rob never chased trends, he chased truth. That's why his films lasted." It was a simple statement, but one that matched his career. Reiner believed storytelling carried moral weight. He did not see films as distractions alone, he saw them as mirrors. His work asked quiet questions about right and wrong, about courage and compromise. He believed stories could guide without preaching. As the film industry changed, Reiner remained consistent. He valued clear narratives and strong characters, even when styles shifted. His voice stayed recognizable, calm, human, purposeful behind the scenes. He was known as a director who listened. Actors often spoke about feeling respected on his sets. One performer shared, "He made you feel safe enough to be honest." That's rare. That trust showed on screen. Reiner's passing prompted a reflection across the industry. Writers, actors, and filmmakers shared brief tributes. One message read, "He taught us that stories can have a conscience." Another noted, "His work helped us understand who we were and who we could be." Beyond awards and recognition, Reiner's true impact lived in memory. In scenes replayed across generations, in lines quoted quietly, in lessons absorbed without notice. He helped define what American storytelling could be, not loud, not careless, but thoughtful, grounded, and sincere. His work made room for empathy in a crowded cultural space. As news of his death settled, there was a sense of gratitude alongside loss. Gratitude for decades of stories that shaped conversation. Gratitude for a career built on purpose rather than noise. Robert Reiner leaves behind more than films and television moments. He leaves behind a standard, a belief that stories matter, and that how they are told matters just as much. His voice may now be absent from the present, but it remains present in the culture he helped shape. In remembering Robert Reiner, America remembers a storyteller who framed a generation with care, clarity, and quiet conviction. The news came softly, carried on quiet lines, a confirmation that felt heavier than words. On December 8, 2025, it was confirmed that Raul Malo had died. There were no flashing headlines, no sudden noise, just a pause. For many, it felt like the moment when a familiar song ends and the silence that follows makes its meaning clearer. Raul Malo was a voice before he was a star, a voice that carried warmth, longing, and honesty. From the beginning, his sound stood apart. It did not rush. It did not shout. It invited listeners in. Born into a world shaped by many cultures, Malo grew up surrounded by different rhythms and traditions. Those early influences stayed with him. Music, to him, was never meant to fit neatly into one place. It was meant to move freely, like feeling itself. He became widely known as the lead singer of the Mavericks, a group that refused to be defined by a single genre. Country blended with Latin rhythm. Rock met soul. The result felt both new and familiar at the same time. During the 1990s, when labels mattered deeply in the music industry, Malo pushed against them. His voice carried smoothness and strength, capable of tenderness and power in the same breath. Listeners often said his singing felt personal, even when played in crowded rooms. One music writer once described his voice as a place you recognize. Even if you've never been there before, it was an image that followed him for years. As the Mavericks gained attention, Malo remained focused on the music rather than the spotlight. He valued connection over performance. On stage, he sang with control and care, letting emotion build naturally instead of forcing it. Bandmates and collaborators often spoke about his sincerity. One longtime colleague shared, "Raul never tried to impress. He tried to be honest. That honesty came through every note. It was a quiet truth, but a lasting one." Beyond the band, Malo explored solo work, continuing to cross boundaries without explanation. His songs spoke of love, loss, and memory. They carried a sense of distance and closeness at the same time. Listeners felt understood, even when the stories were not their own. As music trends shifted, Malo's work remained steady. He did not chase charts. He trusted melody. He trusted feeling. That consistency earned him a loyal audience that followed him across decades. When news of his death spread, tributes came from musicians and fans alike. Many shared the same thought. His music felt like companionship. One fan wrote, "His voice was there during the quiet parts of my life." Another said, "He made music that didn't age, it stayed with you." Malo's passing marked more than the loss of a singer. It marked the loss of a certain kind of musical courage. The courage to blend cultures without explanation, to value emotion over category, to sing with restraint in a loud world. Those who knew him described him as grounded and thoughtful. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was often about craft, not fame. Music, to him, was a responsibility. In later years, his performances carried even more depth. Age added texture to his voice, not distance. Each song felt lived in, each note carried experience. Raul Malo leaves behind a body of work that continues to travel across radios, across memories, across moments when words fall short. His legacy is not only found in recordings, but in the space he created for emotional honesty in American music. He showed that roots are not limits, they are starting points. As the final notes fade, what remains is gratitude. Gratitude for a voice that blended heart and horizon. Gratitude for music that made room for feeling. Raul Malo will be remembered, not just for how he sang, but for how he made people feel, and in that feeling, his presence continues long after the sound has gone quiet.